Το βιογραφικό και μια περίληψη του βιβλίου και μετά θα ξεκινήσουμε. Η συζήτηση θα γίνει στα αγγλικά. Λοιπόν, ο Ντόμινικ Αμερένα γεννήθηκε το 1988 και είναι Αυστραλός συγγραφέας. Το πρώτο του μυθιστόρημα, «Τα θέλω όλα», έχει ήδη κερδίσει πολλά βραβεία, με πιο πρόσφατο το Reading Prize. Και ζει στην Αθήνα εδώ και κάποια χρόνια. Και «Τα θέλω όλα», η ερημίτσα συγγραφέας Brenda Sales παραμένει ένα από τα τελευταία άλυτα λογοτεχνικά μυστήρια της Αυστραλίας. Τα βιβλία της κατέκτησαν τον κόσμο προτού εκείνη εξαφανιστεί από τα φώτα της δημοσιότητας, ύστερα από μια μυστηριώδη υπόθεση λογοκλοπής. Όμως, όταν ένας αποτυχημένος νεαρός συγγραφέας τη βλέπει τυχαία σε ένα κολυμβητήριο της Μελβούρνης, συνειδητοποιεί πως αυτή είναι η ευκαιρία του. Να πει επιτέλους την ιστορία πίσω από την ξαφνική εξαφάνισή της 50 χρόνια πριν. Μόνο που υπάρχει ένα πρόβλημα. Πρέπει να προσποιηθεί ότι είναι κάποιος άλλος για να το καταφέρει. Κάπως έτσι σφραγίζει τη μοίρα του, ενώ πλέκει, αλλά και μπλέκεται σε έναν ιστό από ψέματα, δωροπλοκίες και παρεξηγήσεις, που στο κέντρο του έχει ένα ερώτημα. Ποια ήταν στα αλήθεια η Brenda Sales? Dominic, welcome to Hanya.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's your first time in Crete, right?
First and hopefully, but not the last.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here we have basically a cross between literary fiction and a literary mystery. And without getting too much into the specifics, no great spoilers, your novel is, among other things, a novel about duplicity and deception. Was it an especially fertile ground for you?
Well, I suppose that, I wrote a novel where I wanted to write a really literary novel, and my novels, well, the writing that I've done throughout my career has been very literary. It's about history, it's about sexual politics, it's about kind of gender, and when I was kind of starting to write this book, I found that there was a plot developing, and I really challenged myself to try to write a literary fiction novel with the kind of pacing, plot structure, and kind of amount of intrigue that maybe a more thriller-ish or genre-ish novel would have. And, increasingly I'm beginning to think that, like, literary fiction, that may be the way that it is going to go in the future. Is like a lot of literary fiction, you have to perhaps smuggle the kind of themes and ideas that we've always considered to be very literary within a kind of structure which is maybe a bit more like easy to digest, shall we say.
I think we were talking about this with Julian Pacheco the other day, whose last novel, Jungle House, also has a strong genre element.
Yeah.
And we were also discussing, why is it the case that in the past, let's say 15 or 20 years, there's this, I love the word smuggling. Literary authors are, I wouldn't say experimenting, but dabbling more and more with genre, blurring the lines.
Yeah.
I mean, Station 11 by Emily Mandel is a famous example. Zone 1, the zombie novel by
Colson Whitehead.
Exactly, another example. And we were wondering about the reason for this.
Well, I always think of this quote that Javier Marias once said, which is like, you can write the most literary fiction you want, but just start it with something dramatic. Start it with a suicide, a murder, something. And as long as you're going back to that, you can excite a reader. And I don't know, I think like at a certain point, literary fiction as a genre, and it is a genre.
It is a genre, yeah.
It sort of became associated with a certain type of writing that I really don't like, which is flat, which is kind of heavy, which is humorless, which is something which is not fun to read. And
overly serious.
Overly serious, of course. And it's basically like, I don't think enjoying a book should be a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a really hard thing to do when you're writing a novel, is to make it very enjoyable to read without sacrificing the kind of themes and ideas. And I think a lot of literary writers just got sick of that type of heavy, weighty, Booker Prize winning kind of literary fiction, and they wanted something which is more fun to read. I don't know.
But also, I think, because up to the, 1970s, 1980s, genre was very, looked down upon.
Yes.
But there were pretty good writers working in that vein, in those modes, and, the next generation of writers read these authors, like Philip K. Dick, the British new wave of science fiction, or fantasy, or what have you, horror, Stephen King, anyone. And when they grew up and they wanted to write their own things, the reading history was there, and it wasn't that burdened with, the guilt of something.
Yeah, and prestige, and
exactly.
the weight of the heroes that are kind of like on the back of your neck.
Exactly.
Telling you that.
And they felt more free to play with genre and make crosses between detective novels, like you did here, or
Bolaño or something.
Bolaño, or horror, or science fiction. So yeah, I think other people think Harry Potter is to blame, but I don't think we're there yet.
Well, and I think there's also a kind of postmodern element where it's like, you have to lose some illusions about what literary fiction is. That it is just a genre like any other genre that's read by a certain type of reader, and that certain type of reader isn't better than another type of reader.
Of course.
And so I think it offers a great deal of potential for for playing. And I think there's this other thing, which is like you look at it from the other end, which is I think a lot of publishers think that their readers are dumb and that they have to kind of package genre as something that's always kind of like straightforward, formulaic, and literary fiction is something that kind of also follows these certain formulas. And I think basically just there is much more. I also think that when you think of literary fiction as it's a very small slice of the kind of reading pie. Like there is a lot of reading going on, but most of it is genre fiction.
Exactly.
And I think it's very freeing to kind of think of literary fiction as something which is small because it can kind of make you feel unburdened, and it can make you feel like you can play and you can make exciting things, you can make fun things, you can make the reader really enjoy the reading experience.
Which is the point of the whole enterprise, I think.
Well, some would say otherwise, but yes, that's what I think.
I think so too. Another thing is that you also write in this your only book, about not very nice people. I mean, they're not monsters, truly, but they're not very nice people, which is another trend I've noticed in the younger generation of writers everywhere. And I've always wondered about the reasons. I mean, older writers tend toward the Manichean, or the simpler divisions between good and evil. The more interesting ones had more interesting characters, but most you could see it immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, I still remember when I was small, I read Roald Dahl for the first time, and there were bad people in it. I mean, it was so surprising, like a slap in the face. So I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah, well, I guess personally, I've never really. I find it very strange that like at a certain point there was a idea that you have to identify with the character. You have to almost approve of everything that they do. And that's something I've never really experienced as a reader. Like, if I find a character's too good or too obviously correct, there's no tension, there's no interest to me. And so when I was writing this novel, I wanted morally ambiguous characters. I wanted messy characters. I wanted characters who kind of have multiple readings and different readers respond to them in a different way. And what's been very interesting actually has been kind of getting to know some readers who would tell me this experience where they're like, I hated your narrator, I hated him so much, but also I wanted him to get what he wanted. I wanted him to succeed. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to literature. This is like what happens. You get seduced, like it's seduction. And I think it's very kind of exciting to work with these types of characters. And, in the same way that I would never have a character who was all bad. Like, I would find
that's not interesting.
I would find that completely tedious as well. And so, in fact, it was actually interesting during the writing experience. At certain points, you know, without giving too much away about the plot, you know, the narrator is this very ambitious writer. He wants to kind of make his name, and he stumbles upon this cult author called Brenda Shales from the 1970s. And through her, he kind of sees the opportunity to kind of make his career and make his name. And, you know, he has to kind of go through this quite morally horrible deception in order to achieve his goals. But, you know, there's also this other third character, and the structure of the novel is sort of the interplay and the kind of counterpoint between the motives and desires of these three characters. And one of them was this character Ruth, who's his girlfriend, and she's a very like successful writer, whereas he's not. And in early drafts of the novel, she was really good. She was just like very good. She was like the moral center of the novel. She was always like, well, here's what you should do. This is the correct thing to do. And she was right. And it was so boring. And I had to kind of go back through and make her motives
also ambiguous.
Also ambiguous. I added an element of competition between the characters and, you know, played them off against each other. And then once I really started liking the novel was when I had three really murky, somewhat unlikable, but I would say also kind of lovable characters who...
Oh no, you care about them by the end.
Yeah.
I mean, and you want them to kind of succeed in their chosen endeavor, even though it's conflicting, so not all of them can win, let's say. But yeah, I mean, it's they're very real, and I like the word that you use, murky. I mean, they're not characters that are clear cut, and you can like them in one page and feel sorry for them or cheer them on, and you can say in the next one, "What a jackass! What are you doing?" Oh, and one of the sly things that I liked about the novel is that you have this entirely failed young writer who wants to be the next name by writing a biography.
Yeah.
Which is like, I found it so funny throughout. I was like, are you even, like, have you thought this through?
Well, it's one of the funny kind of, I would say, dramatic ironies of the book, that he's kind of prepared to basically destroy his entire life on the off chance that a biography makes his name, and it's like, when is the last time that's ever happened? So yes, I'm glad you enjoyed that.
I think Elman with the Joyce biography was the last person that became famous.
Oh, well, I've never heard of it, so he can't be that famous.
One of the other very interesting questions your novel poses is the ownership of the story. I mean, whose is the story being told at the end of the day? Is it the subject of the story, or the person who writes it or tells it? Is it the olds or the youngs? Is it the affluent or the poor? I mean, it's ownership of the narrative and of the story is always an interesting.
Well, you know, I think that my novel, again, it's about, you're right, it's about authenticity, it's about authorship, it kind of, but I think it actually asked a lot more questions than it seeks to answer. So I think I tried to kind
Those are the best novels.
Oh, thank you. But, you know, I tried to kind of create characters who might, you know, at different times express or inhabit different ideas about these concepts, which I don't think have a clear answer. Like, if they had a clear answer, they wouldn't be worth writing about.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have like, you know, the Brenda Shales character who represents this, you know, somewhat romanticized idea about like what a writer is and what writing means. And she's this kind of reclusive, true artist who like eschews the public spotlight and stays away from the kind of like, you know, the kind of trappings of fame, which, you know, is in itself a kind of romantic figure and is also a kind of, you know, a symbol which is worth kind of exploring, but also kind of not taking on its face value either. And then,
as the novel shows,
of course. And so the other narrator, you know, the main narrator, he exhibits much more of the kind of ideas of what we might call a neoliberal writer, one who does he even want to be a writer? He just wants
the fame.
He wants to be a writer, but not write, which I think is like
he wants to give interviews and go on stage and get the award.
He wants to be doing like literally this, being at a festival, but he doesn't actually want to write a book. And I think that's actually a very interesting position in the kind of new, like the new kind of online digital writing literary marketplace, shall we say.
And I do think that had always been the case. I mean, there were always writers, people who wanted to write and people who wanted to have written, people who wanted the trappings of the writer without the really hard work that goes in it. And that has all people that wanted to become writers without reading a lot, which always baffled me. And that, I think, did exist even before the rise of the online discourse.
But I also think, you know, in part, there's like almost an economic element to it. Like, because if you think about what the life of a famous, successful author is, it sounds really nice. It's like you don't have to like go and work in an office. You can just be with yourself and be with your thoughts and kind of express yourself. And everybody wants to express yourself. So it's a real desire that I understand. But the reality of it is perhaps much more complicated.
Complicated, much more difficult, and much more hard. And and there's also the tension between, you know, the private practice and the public persona. I mean, and even famous writers struggle with that. I mean, it's difficult. It's a fine line to cross. But you talked about Brenda Shales and her the romantic figure, and her voice in the novel is especially powerful.
Thank you.
Did you have any particular real-life authors in mind when you wrote her and her captivating story?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I would say it was probably one of the most fun parts of writing the novel. So just to contextualize a little bit, you know, the novel sort of, it's narrated by this young man who's a kind of ambitious young author, and then there are sections written from the perspective of Brenda Shales where she's kind of talking about her novels and kind of talking about how they came to be and perhaps the stories behind them. And those sections, you know, I think Brenda Shales as a figure, she's very much tied to this period in history in Australia, which is this period in the 70s, which is marked by, you know, a lot of kind of social and political upheaval, you know, women's rights, Indigenous rights, free healthcare, free university. It was kind of like, I would say probably similar to the Papandreou era where...
Entirely.
Yeah, where Australia kind of became, we had a socialist prime minister for 4 years and everything basically changed in the country. And part of that was this very strong feminist and artistic political movement, which, you know, I've found very inspiring throughout my career. And when I was kind of creating this character of Brenda Shales, I drew upon, you know, a few of these authors who'd meant a lot to me, and like, I'm not sure how familiar you'll be with some of them, but you know, Helen Garner is probably the most famous. She's still living. She's Australia's kind of one of the best essayists and novelists we have, and she has this very dry, laconic style of talking. And you know, I was drawing a lot upon her diaries when I was writing the novel, and kind of looking at her voice and kind of drawing from that. And then, you know, parts of her story, Brenda Shales' story, were drawn from the biographies of other kind of feminist writers like Janet Frame, who's one of New Zealand's best writers, you know, Elizabeth Harrower, who is a kind of famous reclusive writer from Australia. So that was a really fun thing to do, and I think one of the most enjoyable aspects was sort of coming up with the library, or the kind of like the thinking about the books that Brenda Shales would have written and kind of placing them within the literary tradition that, you know, had moved me so much. And, you know, even the novel contains sections from these novels that actually didn't exist, but like, it was very fun to kind of place the novel, or at least parts of the novel, within this literary tradition, which, you know, I found very inspiring and very kind of like important to me, and to Australia as a country.
I must admit that I was not very cognizant of Australia's literary history, because it's not very well represented here.
No.
And also, in my mind, I don't know if that's for everyone, but maybe that's just me. In my mind, Australia had always been a very progressive country, like very well run, and reading about the horrible conservative past, and I don't mean like, you know, the 1800s, the 1700s, like the slaughtering of the Aboriginals, but you know, like 1950s, 1960s, the story of Janet Frame. I was shocked. I was shocked about, you know, how far it's come.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether there's an analog here, but you know, I would link a lot of that to the power of the Catholic Church, which was very, very powerful throughout the 20th century, and you know, through the abuses that it committed has become...
We still have our own here. It's not the Catholic Church, but it's still very strong and very...
Yeah, but a lot of the violence was committed by the Church, and as their power waned, you know, perhaps a lot of those atrocities were kind of fewer and fewer. And that's not to think that Australia is this, you know, wonderful, like, unproblematic country. It's a deeply racist country. It's a colonial country. And I also think that has to be really stated, is that, like, you know, Australia is a country built on theft and colonial violence, and it's kind of like, that fucks people up. It makes them very strange, especially because if you don't acknowledge it, it comes out in very, very strange ways.
It's repressed.
It gets repressed, and it comes out in bizarre, awful ways, and in art as well, you know. One of the things that, again, my novel is sort of in conversation with is that in Australia there's this big tradition of literary scandals which are kind of based on theft and co-option of identity. So whether it's like white people pretending to be Aboriginal when they're writing a book. There's a famous story of a white Australian pretending to be a Ukrainian Jewish refugee whose parents survived the Holocaust. And, you know, these books do really well, and then they'll be kind of found out, and the writers will be brought low. And it's such a trend there that I was really kind of thinking about, like, what is going on here? Why is this country, like, why are the writers so, they're so uncomfortable that they have to kind of pretend that they're somebody else? And, you know, if you think about it through a colonial lens, it sort of makes sense in a Freudian way, shall we say.
Culture-wide imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think if we have like something like that here, but I don't think so. I can be corrected, but I don't think we do. Should we read just a few pages from the book?
Sure.
Λέω να διαβάσουμε πρώτα, να ακούσουμε τον συγγραφέα να διαβάζει και μετά θα διαβάσω και εγώ το διαπόσπασμα στα ελληνικά. Ένα σύντομο.
Okay, so I'm going to read from the 4th chapter, which, to give context, so, you know, the narrator, he's identified Brenda Shales, he's seen her at a public pool, and he's like, okay, this is this person who I need to kind of make my career on, and he is going to present himself to the nursing home where he's sort of tracked her down, and this is what happens. So, I'm just going to make it bigger. Here we go. Even then, I had a plan, though I didn't want to admit it. A part of me dimly aware of what was at stake and what I'd do to make sure things went my way. Ruth was already at work when I left the house, and I didn't feel inclined to disturb her. I had bigger things on my mind. I was still in a state of wonder at all that had happened over the past 3 days, how much things had changed. What luck, what happenstance, fate. I wasn't ashamed to use that word. That's what it felt like, and it felt great. I would present myself to Brenda Shales, gush and kiss the ring. At worst, I'd have a fodder for an essay on my literary pilgrimage, my once-in-a-lifetime scoop. But I knew already that wouldn't satisfy me. I wanted more. I trudged through the back streets of Footscray, keeping in the shade where I could. I bought cannoli from Cavallara's on Hopkins Street, but by the time I'd arrived in Yarraville, the filling had begun to run, and I was forced to dump them in the bins behind the theatre. Panting slightly, I arrived finally in the industrial zone, backing onto Coode Canal, with its sugar refinery and oil terminal, opening out onto a series of vacant lots, across which I saw the jaundiced Yarra and the Westgate Bridge looming downriver. My mind was ablaze with questions. What if Brenda Shales decided to reveal her secrets? What if she took me under her wizened wing? What if this woman wasn't Brenda Shales at all? Mercy House seemed the steepest of step-downs for a writer of Brenda's talent. It was on Beverly Street, spitting distance to the Docklands Highway, a complex of squat, red brick buildings backing onto Stony Creek Reserve, the marshland leading down to the Yarra, the smell of brackish water mingling with truck exhaust which hung in the noonday air. "I'm here to see Brenda Shales," I said. The nurse behind the reception didn't seem to understand the import of my statement. She had a purple cast on her wrist, thin, frizzy hair, a crucifix nestled at her throat. "How do I spell that?" she said. "Like the sedimentary rock, S-H-A. Oh yes, here we are, Brenda Shales, room 27. The blood in my ears was very loud. And who shall I say is calling? I told myself I was a literary well-wisher, but the truth was more sinister. I was there to gawk at a once great talent, discover how the Brenda Shales had ended up in this hovel smelling of refried canola. I was just about to tell the woman my name when a klaxon blared. Someone's had an accident, the nurse sighed, beaten down rather than alarmed. I'd better go. Come on." She bustled me down a corridor lined with footy-tipped scorecards, the carpet a swirl of orange and green, all the way to the door with a "Do Not Sign Disturb" hung on it. The nurse rapped and yelled, "Mrs. Shales, your grandson's here to see you." Before I had time to protest, she was gone. It was the woman from the pool, the woman from the back cover of Anchoress, Brenda Shales, eyes boring holes through the back of my skull. She was hunched forward as if she could barely hold the weight of her head, wearing the same singlet and faded jeans from when I'd seen her by the Mercy House van 3 days prior. She stepped back and allowed me to enter. The blinds were drawn and there wasn't much to see in the room. A single bed, a chest of drawers, a TV bracketed to the ceiling, towel thrown over the screen. I stood there in the middle of the room, hideously exposed. Why hadn't she corrected the nurse's mistake? Asked who I was. What was I doing there? She clearly hadn't recognized me as the man who'd snapped her photo the other day, or if she had, she wasn't letting on. I was just in the middle of clipping my toenails, she said. She resumed the operation and I watched the white crescents drop, felt a mad desire to put them in my mouth, fragments of the body that had written the body of work I'd so admired. "I'm running out of digits," she said, "so tell me what you're doing here. I presume your father sent you. If it's money he's after, please tell him. I'm skinter than skint." Just how long had it been since she'd seen her family? How had she mistaken me for someone she was related to? There was no way to verify without giving the game away. But there was no game to give away. I hadn't done or said anything. I just stood there looking at the floor. "Your father was very clear in his letter that he wanted nothing to do with me," she said. "That was a long time ago, but you must know that. He never mentioned anything about you, though. I suppose he didn't think I deserved to know. I won't ask how you tracked me down. I'm just glad you're here." Brenda Shales clapped her hands. "Now, let's dispense with the mushy stuff. Sit beside me. I want to get a better look at you." I perched at the end of the mattress, feeling decidedly queasy. "Closer, please," she said. "My rods and cones aren't what they used to be." I shuffled closer until the sides of our legs were touching. Though her eyes were fixed on mine, she seemed entirely elsewhere. In those infinite seconds, I prepared to explain myself, but instead found myself saying, "So how are you, Brenda?" "Yes," she said, "that's it. Pleasantries. Well, since you ask, I'm the embodiment of the worst sentence in the English language. I used to be able to do the splits, and now my hip seizes up. My bowel used to be merely irritable, now it's apoplectic. My lover, Mirilam, my Bulgarian Bricky, is losing the plot. He thinks I'm his wife and he loathes his wife, so I'm steering clear of him for the time being. The food is only fit for POWs and Liberal voters. The nurses do their best, but I caught one of them screaming into a pillow yesterday. My fellow inmates have brains like Swiss cheese and bodies to match. Does that about cover it?" She slumped back in bed. It was all too much, too strange, but it wasn't my fault. Any thinking person would have to agree. The nurse had mistaken me for someone else, and curiously, Brenda had too. There'd been a small window in which to clear things up, and unfortunately, I'd missed it. "Maybe I should get out of your hair," I suggested. "Yes, by all means," she said, an edge in her voice. "Time you toddled off. I have a packed schedule too, you know." I was almost at the door when Brenda called out, "You'll come back, won't you?" And that was my undoing. Thank you.
Θα διαβάσω και εγώ τώρα, όχι όλο αυτό, το μισό, στη μετάφραση του Δημήτρη Καρακίτσου. Ακόμα και σε εκείνη τη φάση είχα ένα σχέδιο, κι ας μην ήθελα να το παραδεχτώ. Αφού κάτι μέσα μου υποπτευόταν αμυδρά ή διακυβευόταν εδώ, καθώς και τι θα έπρεπε να κάνω ώστε τα πράγματα να βγουν εις όφελός μου. Η Ρουθ δούλευε όταν έφυγα από το σπίτι και δεν είχα καμία όρεξη να την ενοχλήσω. Είχα πιο σημαντικά πράγματα στο μυαλό μου. Μου φαίνονταν απίστευτα όλα αυτά που είχαν συμβεί τις 3 τελευταίες μέρες. Πόσο πολύ είχαν αλλάξει τα πράγματα. Τι τύχη, τι σύμπτωση. Ήταν γραφτό. Δεν τρεπόμουν να χρησιμοποιήσω αυτή τη λέξη. Έτσι ένιωθα και αισθανόμουν τέλεια. Θα παρουσιαζόμουν στην Brenda Sales. Θα γονάτιζα και θα της φιλούσα το δαχτυλίδι. Στη χειρότερη περίπτωση, θα είχα υλικό για ένα άρθρο που θα εξιστορούσε αυτό το λογοτεχνικό προσκύνημα. Ένα λαβράκι που μόνο μία φορά θα μου τύχαινε στη ζωή. Αλλά ήξερα εκ των προτέρων ότι αυτό δεν αρκούσε. Ήθελα περισσότερα. Περιφερόμουν στα στενά δρομάκια του Footscray, μένοντας στη σκιά όπου αυτό ήταν δυνατόν. Αγόρασα κανόλι από το Καβαλάρο στην οδό Hopkins, αλλά όταν έφτασα στο Γιάραβι, η γέμιση είχε λιώσει, οπότε τα πέταξα στον κάδο πίσω από το θέατρο. Είχα αρχίσει να λαχανιάζω όταν έφτασα στη βιομηχανική ζώνη πίσω από το κανάλι Κούτ, με τη βιομηχανία ζάχαρης και τις δεξαμενές πετρελαίου να βγάζουν σε μια έκταση με άδεια οικόπεδα, πίσω από τα οποία ξεπρόβαλε ο κεντρινοπός Γιάρα με τη γέφυρα Westgate να δεσπόζει πάνω από το ποτάμι. Το μυαλό μου ήταν γεμάτο απορίες. Και αν η Brenda Sales αποφάσισε να μου αποκαλύψει τα μυστικά της, και αν αποφάσισε να με βάλει κάτω από το μαδημένο της Θεό, και αν αυτή η γυναίκα δεν ήταν καν η Brenda Sales, ο οίκος του ελέους παρά ήταν παρακμιακός για μια συγγραφέα του δικού του ελληνικού. Βρισκόταν στην οδό Beverly, 2 βήματα από τον αυτοκινητόδρομο Docklands. Ένα χαμηλό κτηριακό συγκρότημα από κόκκινο τούβλο μπροστά από το Stony Creek Reserve, τον βαλτότοπο που έβγαζε στον Γιάρα, εκεί όπου η μυρωδιά των στάσιμων νερών ανακατευόταν με τα καυσαέρια που γέμιζαν τη μεσημεριάτικη ατμόσφαιρα. Θα ήθελα να δω την Brenda Sales. Η ρεσεψιονίστ δεν έμοιαζε να αντιλαμβάνεται τη βαρύτητα της δήλωσής μου. Είχε τον καπό της μέσα σε μοβ γύψο, τα μαλλιά της ήταν φριζαρισμένα, ένα σταυρός κρεμόταν στο λαιμό της. Πώς γράφεται αυτό? Με το νι, αλλά κυρίως με το σίγμα. Σίγμα, έψιλον, γιώτα, μάλιστα εδώ είμαστε. Brenda Sales, δωμάτιο 27. Ένιωσα την καρδιά μου έτοιμη να σπάσει. Ποιος κύριος τη ζητάει? Η σκέψη που μου πέρασε από το μυαλό ήταν πως ήμουν ένας προσκλητής της λογοτεχνίας, αλλά η αλήθεια ήταν πιο σκοτεινή. Είχα πάει εκεί για να κοιτάξω έκθαμπος ένα πρώην σπουδαίο ταλέντο, για να ανακαλύψω με ποιο τρόπο η Brenda Sales είχε καταλήξει σε τούτο εδώ το αχούρι που μύριζε τηγανόλαδο. Πριν όμως προλάβω να πω το όνομά μου στη ρεσεψιονίστ, ακούστηκε κάτι σαν κόρνα. Κάποιος κάτι έπαθε. Η νοσοκόμα αναστέναξε, όχι με άγχος, αλλά από την κούραση. Πρέπει να πάω να δω. Για έλατε μαζί μου. Με τράβηξε σε ένα διάδρομο γεμάτο πίνακες με τα αποτελέσματα του πρωταθλήματος ποδοσφαίρου, με μια άφλια παρταλή που μου κοίτα στο πάτωμα, και σταματήσαμε μπροστά σε μια πόρτα στην οποία κρεμόταν ένα μην ενοχλείτε. Η νοσοκόμα χτύπησε την πόρτα και φώναξε. Κυρία Sales, ήρθα να σας δει ο εγγονός σας. Πριν προλάβω να πω κάτι, είχε φύγει. Okay, now we will continue with a few questions. Without trying to pigeonhole you, since this is your only published book, but you seem like a writer who is writing about the present, and grappling with present concerns. Is this your preferred mode? Because some writers prefer to write about the past, because the past is surely safer. I mean, nothing can be disproved, or fewer things can be disproved. When you're writing about the present, you have the danger that things will go a different way in the future, and you will be judged in a harsher light.
I suppose I think well, as soon as you're writing about the present, it's the past because the publication process is quite slow. But I think you just have to write about the things that move you, and some weird writers like reading old letters by dead people and they want to write novels about that, and I think that's fantastic. But I write novels about the things that move me and the questions that I find tricky, and I guess you have to write a novel to like when you don't know the answers. And I think it's very funny because my novel is quite autobiographical, though not in the ways that maybe some people suspect. But I resisted that reading of the novel until I started rereading it, and I can just see how autobiographical it actually was. That it's a novel about me kind of grappling with questions that had to do with my emotional life, my personal life, my sexual life, where I was living, what I was doing, but I couldn't answer those questions very easily, so I had to write a novel about somebody else stuck and somebody else in a kind of situation that they had to kind of work very hard to extricate themselves from. And so, you know, I think when you're writing a novel, you can't really like think about the themes or the kind of ideas behind it. The ideas emerge almost afterwards. That's how it is with me.
I think that if you write programmatically, you end up most of the times with a lesser book. I think the emergent things are more interesting and more organic to use in much.
You can't just like, you can't pick a topic. Well, maybe you can. So in certain types of books, perhaps you can.
Some people do.
Some people do. But, you know, for me, you can't really answer the questions about like what your book is doing and why you did it. And in fact, you know, it was a very strange experience going on book tour for the first time and being asked, you know, where did these ideas come from? What are these themes about? And you're sort of making it up at the beginning and you have to work it out from scratch. It's almost like you're reading a book as a reader.
Reverse engineer it.
Yeah, exactly. But then you present it as if these ideas were the ones that you started with and the book emerged from them, but the book emerged and then you realized you were...
I just sat down to write and, you know, I had to write something and here it is.
Here it is, and then you kind of go back and you're like, oh, well, I was thinking about this, but I just wasn't thinking about it. It was just in there somewhere.
Kind of like I tapped into that, like I stumbled by accident. That goes right into my next question, which is a favorite topic of mine. I Want Everything has some autobiographical elements,
yes,
which is par for the course for a debut. But I wanted to ask your opinion about a favorite topic of mine, or perhaps a pet peeve. The rise of autofiction in the past, like 10 or 15 years, which I am kind of ideologically opposed. But what is your take? Why has this?
Well, I think when you look at it historically, like, it's maybe more popular. It was popular in the 2010s, shall we say. Maybe it's sort of winding back a little bit, but it goes in waves. Like, you know, the 90s had very equally a lot of books that could be considered autofiction, and I think, you know, this kind of binary between fiction and non-fiction has always been a kind of interesting flexion point for novelists forever. And I think, I don't know, I tend to look at it in a kind of positive light. Like, I think it might be something to do with the reading experience. You know, it's about wanting to kind of know an author, and like reading a book is a very intimate, private, humbling experience where you become close to the author. And I think wanting to know more about the author is a very kind of natural kind of desire, and I think autofiction kind of taps into that desire. And it's about kind of like, again, making the line between this kind of like author and the character a bit like kind of murkier. And I think, you know, when done well, it's very fun. And of course, like with all sort of like trends or genres or whatever, like when it's done very well, I think it's excellent, and when it's done kind of like programmatically, it's quite tedious. Yeah,
there's good stuff and there's bad stuff for sure. But I think that because I saw it kind of like rise after 2010, and like in increasing fashion, I think that maybe it's because the rise of social media kind of muddled the reality and nowadays the truth, and the reading public, the reader started craving for some
authenticity or
dry ground, some stability and a measure of certainty that they didn't need from a book in previous decades. But then they needed like some kind of stable, you know, some anchor. And you know, because we run on stories, and stories are our fuel. They wanted this, like, you know, based on a true story, and then eventually like I want the truth. I want what happened.
Yeah, perhaps, but I also think that, you know, social media, maybe we got used to authors having to be 100% visible all the time and to do this kind of relentless self-promotion, which, you know, there just wasn't the media available for an author to do that in the past. And I think that would be kind of a relief, to be perfectly honest. But like, so, you know, I think autofiction is tied to social media because maybe authors are more used to kind of putting their private lives into the public domain.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. You have been living in Greece for the past, what, 9 years? 10?
Something like that, yeah.
How do you think, how has it affected your writing? I mean, both the country itself and the distance you have from your homeland and your mother tongue.
Well, it's interesting because my novel is a very Australian novel, and it's quite strange because I wrote it 100% in Greece. Like I wasn't going back and doing research in Australia. It was just from like my memory of living in Australia, and I had to do a lot of kind of Google searches to make sure that all of the places that I was referencing haven't been turned into like a fucking Starbucks or something. So like, it was interesting, and I think like it perhaps gives you a certain distance where you can see your place, the place that you come from, in a kind of like more clear-eyed context while still having that kind of emotional charge. But like, I had a very interesting experience where I started a new novel recently, and I started this novel and I had this idea and it was going all right and it was set in Australia again. I'm like, what am I doing? I haven't lived in Australia for like 10 years. Why am I doing this again? And I had to stop and I'm like, what am I avoiding about like writing about Greece? And so I kind of threw it away and I just started a new novel, and it's going quite well, and it's set in Athens, and it's kind of like, it's answering a lot of the questions I have about living here and about staying here and my kind of status here and my class position and being a foreigner, and kind of like questions about integration and travel and kind of these thorny topics. And
it's very nice. I mean, you know about you wrote an article about destination novels.
Yes, exactly.
In
so
the LA Review of Books, and which I totally agree with, by the way.
Thank you.
And you know about novels that are set in tourist destinations like Greece, and that they treat the place just as a backdrop and nothing else. There's no depth to it. There's no contact with the local population. Greeks don't figure into it. They don't factor in the story at any point. So that's that. It's very nice.
Yeah, and I think it's a very kind of understandable position to, you know, I know so many Greek writers, and it's so hard for kind of Greek writing to travel outside of Greece, and it must be quite galling to not be able to have a Greek novel translated into English, but have 5 novels published every year written by an English novelist set in Athens, describing a kind of tourist experience of Greece, and
reading them and recognizing nothing from the real city, the real experience.
And, you know, I thought about, like, I wrote that essay and, you know, I was very proud of that essay, but, you know, I was also kind of interested in, like, where my position sits in that. And so, you know, I think there's fertile ground there to write a novel from maybe that position in a kind of, like, complicating those points of view and complicating the presence of kind of foreigners in a country like Greece.
Well, you've shown an aptitude of working through thorny questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think to return to your previous question about like maybe how Greece has changed my writing, and I guess, you know, without romanticizing it at all, one of the things that really inspire me about Greece is that, you know, there isn't as much money in the publishing scene. There's far less kind of institutional kind of backing, which makes it tough for artists, and it makes it tough for no institutional backing. But, you know, it does create the conditions for like a lot of small DIY very kind of targeted, passionate publishers, you know, like your publisher, which are somewhat self-sustaining. And like these kind of small publishers where people really care about the work that they're putting out, they basically died out in countries like Australia, where everything's been eaten up by giant conglomerates. And it's kind of, there's a really powerful reading public which doesn't just gravitate towards giant publishers, and I think that's really exciting and really interesting.
No, it's, I think the blessing here is that we have no conglomerates in publishing.
Yeah.
I mean, we have in everything else or in many other sectors, but in publishing, there are no conglomerates. Even the largest publishers are family operated.
Yeah.
So
whereas Penguin's owned by?
Penguin's owned by, I don't know, some weapons.
Well, they're owned by Bertelsmann.
Okay.
Who is a German multinational that published all the Nazi propaganda.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. So yeah. No, here it's not. It's the blessing of it's the curse and the blessing of the small language. We are a very small language. We are a completely sisterless language. There's no language connected to it, and so that protects and damns us in equal measure. Can you tell us a little about Salad Days, your literary salon in Athens?
Our literary salon?
Well, I wouldn't call it that, because you started it.
Okay, so briefly I started a literary salon where we would kind of bring together readers from Greek readers and also kind of international writers. Greek writers and international writers who kind of, I think the international writing world exists in Greece, but it doesn't often kind of like mix much with the Greek literary scene. And so, you know, I wanted to design this night which would bring together kind of writing from Greece and from people living or staying or visiting Greece. And, you know, it had some really interesting kind of... It
was a reading series, something that's normally not done in Greece. There were 6 writers in every evening, and they would read for like 10 minutes each. And that's it. No conversation, no discussion about presentation, nothing. It was just reading, the writer reading 10 minutes, 1,000 words of his choice, of his or her choice, and that's it, which was very freeing for me. And then I was called to be kind of like the local contact with the native informant. Yes. Okay, I think we have time for a couple of questions. If there's, αν θέλει κάποιος να κάνει κάποια ερώτηση, στα ελληνικά ή στα αγγλικά μπορώ να μεταφράσω, μπορείτε να την κάνετε τώρα, γιατί ο χρόνος μας τελειώνει. Παρακαλώ.
How did you find your translator?
This guy?
Is this your translator?
No. I found the translator.
He's my publisher. But he is a very good translator. But it was Dimitris Karakitsos, and so Panagiotis found him.
Ο οποίος είναι πολύ γνωστός συγγραφέας και ο Ντόμινικ Καρακίτσος. Και τον κάνω μεταφραστής. Αλλά εγώ τον διάλεξα εγώ.
Are you looking for one?
I was wondering why translators are so very rarely mentioned in general.
I think it's often hard because, like, you know, I can't really judge my Greek. You know, I can speak a little bit of Greek, but like I can't speak it well enough to understand how wonderful the translation is. And I think, you know, translators do deserve much more credit. And I think that's sort of changing in the book world, that, you know, there are a lot of translators who now, they won't give their work unless they get their name on the front cover, which is something which never used to happen, but is now quite common. So, you know, I think that's sort of changing.
Or we put the bio of the translator on the back flap.
Sorry, I didn't want to shame you.
What? Why?
Is he on the front cover?
Of course he is. He is, of course.
Yeah.
We always do that.
Okay, good. You respect the translator.
I am one myself, so yeah. But even if I wasn't, I mean, it's the great thing to do. Κάποια άλλη ερώτηση? Τότε να σας ευχαριστήσουμε που ήσασταν εδώ μαζί μας απόψε και μας ακούσατε. Ένα χειροκρότημα για τον Ντόμινικ Αμερένα και να πω ότι το βιβλίο είναι διαθέσιμο στο βιβλιοπωλείο της έκθεσης. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που ήσασταν εδώ απόψε.
Thank you very much.